This is Let's Talk Chattanooga Real Estate, the podcast where we cover home buying, home selling, home improvement tips and ideas, market trends and developments, and investing in real estate. If you own real estate in the Chattanooga, Tennessee area, or want to own real estate here, then you're in the right place. Let's Talk Chattanooga Real Estate is hosted by Blake Watson, a real estate agent and investor in Tennessee and Georgia.
Welcome to Let's Talk Chattanooga Real Estate. I'm Blake Watson, your host, and I am a licensed realtor in Tennessee and Georgia with Epic Realty. Our guest today is Sam Hall. He is the owner of ChattanoogaHistory.com. Welcome, Sam.
Glad to be here.
It's good to have you. Sam and I go back quite a ways, actually. Sam and I both worked together at KZ106 many years ago.
It's true.
As DJs. So
when we were very young.
We were very young, and we were playing the rock and roll that is now classic rock and roll.
It was the same rock, but it's just now it's classic.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, it was lots of fun, as you know, and it's great memories.
Yeah. So speaking of memories, what we're going to talk about today on the Let's Talk Chattanooga Real Estate podcast is Chattanooga history. And Sam has just done this incredible job of really being the historian, unofficial historian of Chattanooga. I count him as the official one, but
that's a lot that's a lot of weight on my shoulders. I don't know if I'd say that.
Well, maybe a history in pictures
enthusiast.
Why don't you tell us about what
Sure.
you have done, Sam, and then we'll go into what we're going to talk about today is neighborhoods in Chattanooga.
Right.
And really the history of some of these neighborhoods.
Okay.
So if you've been living in a neighborhood that you'd like to know the history about, well, we're going to talk a little bit about that maybe.
Hopefully so. Okay. Well, ChattanoogaHistory.com started out in 2014, believe it or not, as DeepZoomChattanooga.com. That was the original domain. And I was just very interested in the high-resolution photos that I was finding available from places like the Library of Congress, but I needed a way to explore them, not only for myself, but wanted to share with others. So that was the idea, and it started with just a few of those. People really responded well. They liked it. And so I kept growing it, doing more things with it, and it became ChattanoogaHistory.com a couple of years ago when that domain became available, which is much easier to remember.
Yeah.
And I have surprised myself. It is a hobby, but it is one I enjoy, and I will continue to do it as long as I can. And I have a lot of cool things. If you've not visited the site, you don't even have to remember the domain. Just type in Chattanooga History into the search. It's going to be probably one of the top, if not multiple, top hits.
Yeah. I also appreciate you post a lot of stuff on social media that links back to ChattanoogaHistory.com
right.
usually so that I can get the whole story.
That's right.
But I really appreciate that. So I follow you on social media in that way. And the photographs and video, the work that you've done, I mean, I see so much restoration of old photographs.
A lot of technology has come along that didn't exist even when I started the site. You know, we talk about AI and all that. Well, there's a lot of tools out there that have made it easier to do what was almost impossible a few years ago. Facial recognition, photo restoration.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm always looking for tools and ways to shortcut and make it, as long as it's accurate, but make more things accessible online. That's my other big thing, is making information available online and not just locked away in some archive.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that too. If anybody wants to go to the website, I'll mention it again. Obviously, we've mentioned ChattanoogaHistory.com. Sam has collected all of this great stuff and said, come into my living room and let's look at it together.
I don't even use cookies. I don't even know how to use cookies. So you'll be pleasantly surprised that I'm not going to hit you with pop-ups saying, cookies and sign up and all that. It's pretty easy. I try to make it low drag.
Yeah, appreciate that too. So let's talk about some neighborhood history.
Sure.
And maybe you can direct us as to some of the earliest neighborhoods, parts of town. I mean, obviously there was downtown Chattanooga.
Right. Well, in general, Chattanooga, as every city, has grown from, small town and then grown outwards. In fact, when Chattanooga was established in 1839, I believe it was just a small couple of blocks, basically. And by the way, I work at EPB Fiber Optics. I'm going to refer to that because of the next location I'll talk about is where the EPB building is downtown, used to be considered the outskirts.
Oh, wow. So closer to the river was
that's right.
downtown.
That was Chattanooga. Okay. And so...
and then out at MLK and Market, right. That area was in the outskirts.
It was in the outskirts. Wow. There were swampy areas. There was you've heard of the Stone Fort?
Yes.
There used to be literally a giant protrusion, I can't say it, of limestone. I mean, literally a couple of stories tall that was sticking up out of the ground around where the... Edney building is, and then all in that area.
Yeah, sure.
And some of the earliest photos, you'll see people visiting it, and some woman in an old hoop skirt type dress, old, Southern Belle dress standing on top of it.
Yeah.
And so you had that area that was cleared out, and by the early 1900s, it was pushing out further. And so by then you had Cameron Hill growing. You had Missionary Ridge was a huge neighborhood that was promoted early in the I would say between 1900 and 1920 was a huge boom time for neighborhoods. Highland Park, just about anything you can think of immediately adjacent to downtown started as a middle-class neighborhood. And before, and we had this, pretty much, it kept pushing outward. And then finally you get into the or post-World War II. Let's say that post-World War II, they came back from fighting the war, another demand for housing. And that started pushing us into areas like what we know as Brainerd now.
Yeah.
But let me throw out this little factoid. Brainerd was not, if you went back to about 1920 and you talked about Brainerd, people would look at you funny because there was no Brainerd.
There was the mission.
They would know that there was a Brainerd mission.
Yeah, they would know that, but that's about it, huh?
Right. So I think it was the Daughters of the American Revolution began a campaign at some point in the 20s to rename that area and the road, which we know as Brainerd Road now, to Brainerd Road. It was Bird's Mill Road at the time because there was a big mill, a water mill, that operated close to where the Brainerd Walmart is now.
Okay.
There's like
just
a
right
creek
there on the
in
creek.
front of
Chattanooga or Chickamauga Creek, right?
Yeah, and there was a huge mill. It was called Bird's Mill. It was a destination that even when it was not an active mill, people would use those as destinations to go picnic and stuff.
Okay.
So it was Bird's Mill Road.
So that was out in the country, wasn't it?
That was definitely the country. And you look on my website, you can go to the maps page. I've digitized a lot of the maps like 1904, 1914. And then by then you start to see these maps go out beyond the ridge. They used to just stop at the ridge, and everything else is like, there be dragons here. It's like the world ends. But even in I think in 1914, you see Bird's Mill Road. You see what I think is Seminole now, and it just says County Road. And then you'll see like an actual estate that says Belvoir.
Okay.
Now we don't think about everything was named for usually a people or an estate that was there before.
Yeah. Belvoir.
Belvoir was just apparently an estate. Amnicola was named for a big, I'll call it a plantation, but it was just a big estate that I believe Crutchfield, the family that operated the Reed House first, had out that way. And
okay.
I've seen ads for around Thanksgiving, come out and get your Thanksgiving turkey at Amnicola Farms or whatever. So so they had a side business. They sold chickens and things. I don't know, but that's what you find is that every part of town is usually based on a person's name or an Indian reference, of course.
Right, of course, yeah. Ooltewah would be more
absolutely, yeah. And I don't know when it was adopted, but one of the things I do when I build the web pages, because I try to have little topics, right? Mm-hmm. And I'll dive into them, and I will go down rabbit trails myself and say, oh, I didn't know that. For instance, White Oak in Red Bank, the cemetery there, which is, what is it called now? I know it's been called Hamilton Memorial Gardens. The Duck Pond. Everybody knows about the Duck Pond.
Yeah, I don't remember the name of the cemetery, though.
Well, it's I think it goes through different name changes, but it used to be just the White Oak Cemetery.
Okay.
Is the way I always knew it. And the Duck Pond. Well, dealing with some early glass plate negatives, which was how we took photos before, let's say, the 1920s, which I'm really into, by the way. There were some people photographed in front of a gate that said White Oak Cemetery.
Okay.
That makes it easy for me. Yeah. Usually it's very hard to identify where a photo was taken.
Oh, that's great.
But
yeah.
what blew my mind is like, this doesn't look like any view I can think of. So it took a long time. I would go drive by there and take some pictures and compare them, and finally figured out that this was probably the mid to late 1800s. Chattanooga was running out of cemetery space. They needed to expand into other areas. There was the farmland there that was turned into a cemetery. But when you first start a cemetery, you get it all fixed up very nice, and they planted things, but there's not many plots there. Mm-hmm. Well, it became a picnic destination, and so the people would take pictures. They would go for picnics there.
Oh, so that's how you ended up with photographs. Huh?
So I have these photographs of people, and even the cemetery doesn't know whose house it was on the hill behind the. There's so that area you get to see how things started that otherwise got lost in time.
Well, I was thinking about the history of, say, Rossville Boulevard down through Dodds Avenue and East Lake area. Well, from what I've understood is that all the car dealerships used to be on Rossville Boulevard. And it's hard to imagine that now, but that's what was there, and that's what was going on. So what's your take on that part of town, kind of south of I-24? What would be
It used to just be
now?
the county road.
Okay.
Actually, I take it back. It was the government road is what it was called.
Okay.
Because keep in mind, before cars, there were just improved trails, basically, that the government had built. And it became Rossville Boulevard and Rossville after John Ross, of course, who was pretty much a pioneer in Chattanooga, who was part Cherokee.
Ross's Landing.
Ross's Landing. That's what he ran a business there before Chattanooga was even really thought of. And so he had a cabin there at the base of Missionary Ridge. It's still there. It's I think they moved the cabin at some point, but
it's next to a duck pond as well.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And so that was his family homestead. And there's some interesting photos from the Civil War time that you see nothing but desolation and this one little cabin in the distance, and that was John Ross's place. So that got renamed to Rossville, and they renamed the government road to Rossville Boulevard.
Okay.
And so that different roads also get renamed along the way.
Right. That's
Lee
true.
Highway becomes something else, and then it becomes Lee Highway again.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So that area, Rossville, was thriving for many years, and all the car dealers were there. My parents, who graduated high school 1958, tell stories about drive-ins and hangouts, and it was, man, what a scene that must have been.
Wow. It was the Brainerd Road of the 80s, I guess. And then the gun barrel of today, maybe. I don't know.
Kind of, but we really don't have a lot to compare it to.
True.
You and I know that because we lived in the 80s and we know how Brainerd Road was.
Yeah.
And it was a hangout still. We got to see a little bit of what that was. So Rossville fell into disarray, let's say. Unfortunately, it has not come back from anywhere near what it used to. There's other places in town. I'll use Red Bank, for instance. Mm-hmm. Red Bank has kind of waned as generations died off, and then it came back. It's been gentrified, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think East Ridge is probably certain parts of East Ridge, certain parts of Brainerd have done that, and we'll continue to see that. But back to how it grew, I think it is just natural to see that. Assume that wherever you are didn't used to be a place. It used to be an empty field.
Yeah.
And then it slowly grew, unless you happen to live within a few blocks of the river.
Yeah.
And then even at one time, that was somebody fighting Indians for it. I don't know. But yeah, so that's there were a lot of areas of town that the names have fallen out of favor. But I don't know if you ever noticed this, but if you ever take a picture on your cell phone and you're bringing it up later and it tells you the location, sometimes it'll throw you off. It'll be like Onion Bottom.
Oh, right. It'll be some reference that you're not really
reference
familiar
to
with.
a map place, and you're like, what is that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Onion Bottom is off 11th Street, 12th Street, in that area where the community kitchen is. There's a police station there.
Yeah.
And
The old farmer's market.
Farmer's market.
Yeah.
That was called Onion Bottom. In fact, the police station is still referred to internally as the Onion Bottom Station.
Ah, how about that?
But so as you're going, you can use your iPhone, have fun with this. Just take some pictures or look at pictures you've taken and say, what part of town is this?
Wow.
And so that's when you're going to see some places that have gone away. Germantown used to be an area where a lot of Germans lived, but there was a Dutch town too.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. There's a Sunnyside that I don't hear people refer to Sunnyside as much. There used to be a Sunnyside school.
Mm-hmm.
I have heard people saying they went there. There may still be. I don't know. But it's above Germantown along the ridge.
Okay, so just a little north of Germantown on
when
the
I
ridge,
look at like the 1914 map, you'll see Germantown's not even mentioned. It'll say like Dutchtown, Sunnyside, and it's just like, wow, that's neat. We're full of history that way, and I try to cover as much of that as I can.
Yeah.
But I also have a search on the website, so you can always type something in and see if it comes up.
Okay. So we can search your website just from being on the homepage.
Yes, and it's better than Google, so you don't depend on Google.
No doubt about that.
Yeah.
So let's think about some historic neighborhoods, and the two that come to mind right off that are actually historic neighborhoods in the city are St. Elmo and Ferger Place. That I just think
it's
about.
A good one.
Tell us what you know about those and the origins.
Well, Ferger Place, what I know, and I've seen an ad, one of their original hand-drawn ads in 1913. And I meant to bring that along. I'll send it to you later, but because you'd find it fascinating. It was an early subdivision development, which was kind of a new concept. I mean, always there were builders developing areas of town, but the idea of purposely building a whole area, giving it a name. In this case, it has that, what is that, like a U shape?
Yeah, you've got Morningside and Eveningside, which is wonderful.
Yeah, and they were nice homes, and they were promoting, Ferger Place. Ferger's the name of the developer, okay? I think there were two guys. And the neat thing about that is, despite all the changes going on around it, to my knowledge, it has always remained well maintained. It didn't really fall from grace. I mean, sometimes, let's look at North Chattanooga, for instance. Chattanooga, I wish I could go back in time and buy some property off Tremont Street.
Sure. Don't we all? Yeah,
because
right.
back in the day, you didn't want to get caught there at night and maybe even not during the day. I mean, it was kind of a dangerous part of town. There were lots of little rundown areas. Well, as you get older, you realize, this isn't a very convenient location. Look what's happened. It's gone up in value. Ferger Place, I don't know the history of this for sure, but it seems like it's always been pretty good.
Yeah.
And it continues to be well sought after because there's only a handful of houses there. It's off of, is it Main?
Yeah, it's right on East Main Street. And you're exactly right. It probably fell a little bit out of favor, I'm sure, in the 70s and 80s and 90s probably. But as soon as East Main Street started coming back strong, that neighborhood, I mean, it's in the ideal location.
And the houses were built to last.
They were. The houses, it's always been cool architecture and cool homes.
Yeah.
Always. So I'd say yes.
And that's the other thing, is there are some areas. What was another area of town you were going to mention? You mentioned St. Elmo.
Yeah, St. Elmo. So also an interesting architecture through there. Yeah.
Yes. Now, it has gone through a lot of changes over time. St. Elmo proper, right around the incline, has always had a lot of, I would say, positive activity and some neat houses in there. It has waned as far as its popularity. I think it got left behind in some of that growth that we saw in other areas of town, but it seems like it's coming back strong. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of really cool old houses that are being redone out there and restored.
Yeah.
I love to see that. So that just feeds right into Chattanooga Valley, and a lot of people are developing down there now.
That's right, on south into Georgia. What about Northshore, what we now know as Northshore North Chattanooga.
Started out as Hill City.
Hill City.
Which was mainly after the Civil War was populated. So it was a poor area of town, okay, in general, but it was very affordable. There was a little community that grew up. And then by the late 1800s, there was a guy named Beck that there's still land over there that's referred to as Beck. You would have these big landowners. They would have a big farm and a single house sitting there. So a lot of that is become now really nice houses around the Chattanooga Country Club, the Golf and Country Club over there. So, and then you had a combination of small neighborhoods, large neighborhoods. It grew just crazily starting in the late 1800s. But what really took off for it was the bridge, the Walnut Street Bridge.
Yeah.
So keep in mind that in the Civil War, we didn't have a bridge that spanned the river. The Northern troops came in. One of the first things they did, armies are good about this, is they built a bridge for the military use.
Okay.
It's all wood. I mean, they cut down trees for miles to build this bridge. It was the military bridge. And it looks like you just said, I want to make a bridge, but I don't have any steel. Here, do it out of wood. And that's exactly what it looks like. Well, Chattanooga, of course, benefited in many ways out of all that building, and the bridge was one of them, except that in 1867, unfortunately, a flood washed it away.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So we were back to ferries. And
that's how it was then.
Yeah,
huh?
And they had ferries, and so Northshore had a ferry. There was one on the other side. They used ropes to actually put anchors to, it called a swing ferry, to use the current to get people from one side to the other. And
so they would actually have ropes across the river. That
it was actually a rope tied to a pivot point.
Okay.
And then imagine you've got current going, and they'd have a stick, and they would push themselves and kind of like swing laterally.
Okay, I get that now.
They'd get to the next pier, tie off to it, do it again.
Like a pendulum.
It was like a pendulum, yeah.
Yes.
So there is one picture I know of that shows that. And
that's cool.
Yeah. It was just south of the island there, McClellan Island. So, but when 1890 rolls around, and it was a big deal that the new iron bridge, as they called it, came along, and that opened up that whole area for growth.
Okay.
So the story of North Chattanooga really begins in 1890 as far as neighborhood, and it grew, and that, of course, grew. Red Bank, everything north grew from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was a big deal. Of course, Signal Mountain was a latecomer. It was developed by C.E. James. What a guy. I mean, we have the James Building. We have James Boulevard on Signal Mountain. But he built Signal Mountain.
I was going to ask, when did that all happen?
That happened in the 15 to 1920-ish. He had his eye on some development there. He had tried different things. One of the people I think one of his investors was William Taft.
Taft Highway.
Taft Highway. That was the ode to 127. That's where 127 is named. And it's kind of like, hey, thanks for the donations, former president. Here, we'll name this after you. C.E. James built Old Town on Signal Mountain. If you go up there around Alexian Brothers, I lived there when I was in kindergarten, in a little house there. Beautiful little neighborhood, and it is still a beautiful neighborhood. You had the trolley tracks that they preserved going toward Alexian. Alexian was a hotel, and when they first built the path up the mountain, which is the main way up the mountain, as we call it, it was the electric railway. You've probably seen pictures of the trolley that would travel, and it went all the way to the Chattanooga, the hotel there. And there was a small casino there for a short time.
Wow.
Yeah. Good times.
Yeah.
And there was, of course, Rainbow Lake, and you had recreational activity. Everything grew around that. And all those houses that C.E. James lived in and all these other people are still there. You may have heard, I don't know if you ever heard of Marr, M-A-R-R, or have heard of Marr Place up there. That was a Buick engineer who was just so stressed out, he moved his whole family here.
Really?
Yes, and he had an estate.
How about that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that hopefully helped him calm down a little bit.
I think so. His wife liked it, and that's what mattered. So. Yeah, no, he ended up retiring here, but it's just a great story how that started. Now, Lookout Mountain, I'm actually less versed in its history. I think it just naturally was a place that people built big houses.
Yeah, well, you had the incline. I don't know when that was built, actually.
Late 1800s.
Okay.
And that was a second incline. There was actually a first incline that was built toward Point Park.
Okay.
And it was, it went to another hotel. It was the what do you call it? The Gilded Age was full of these grandiose hotels. Like if you've ever seen The Shining, you know that giant hotel. And then there's a movie with Christopher Reeves as Superman, or who played Superman rather. But then there was one called Time After Time where he goes. They filmed it at one of those great grandiose hotels that existed back in the turn of this last century.
Yeah.
We had those too. We had this Lookout Mountain Hotel that was at the top of the incline number 2.
Okay.
Huge hotel. You had the Point Hotel, and they both burned. And because they quickly fell out of favor, I don't know really what happened, but I think as people started, driving automobiles and stuff, there was less of that destination location.
Yeah.
So the inclines served the developers' needs of getting people to hotels.
Interesting.
Yes.
Okay.
The first incline didn't last very long. There's not really any sign of it. The incline we have today is incline number 2.
Interesting.
Yeah. And
I did not know that.
Yeah.
So the number 2 continues.
Yeah, it is technically the second incline.
Yeah.
And still a engineering feat of marvel. Unfortunately, it's shut down at the moment because of that fire they had.
Right.
But they are bringing it back, and so it should be open hopefully by summer.
Looking forward to that.
Mm-hmm.
But that certainly supported the development of the town of Lookout Mountain,
Absolutely.
Tennessee and Georgia.
Yeah, it looks like it grew on a similar track to other areas, early 1900s. Chattanooga around 1890 to 1900 was just on fire development-wise. It would have blown you away because of just the activity, the building, the few pictures we have from that time period. You can see all these church steeples, the grandiose church steeples going up. And before that, there was nothing. It's just squat little buildings.
Yeah.
So
I guess the railroad really drove that so much, did it not?
The railroad started going back to the location of EPB now, has a historic backstory. That used to be the location for the first railroad station.
Okay.
Which was the Western and Atlantic Railway. I think they opened that in 1851. There's probably people screaming at the podcast, no, you got it off by a month. Anyway, that was a big deal because the other end of that railway was a place they just called Terminus. And it was down in Georgia. They just put a surveyor spike in the ground. Then it was named Marthasville. And this is a couple of years after Chattanooga was established. It was renamed Atlanta. Yeah, so it became
Terminus became Atlanta.
It became Marthasville, then it became Atlanta. Then, of course, you had the great locomotive chase that occurred on it later during the Civil War. But yeah, all the railroad, when they put that railway station there where they did, that I mentioned earlier, is in the outskirts, it was a bold move. They're like, what, you're not going to put it to the river?
Right.
Nobody. It's like, why would you do that?
Way out in the country.
Well, it was out. Yeah, it was out.
Or out of the outskirts. Yeah.
It was in the outskirts, and so it was like kind of a pain. But I think they were smart in doing that because it drove the city's growth away from just the river.
Yeah.
Now you had another center of growth, and it kind of grew between. Because before the railroad, it was all river traffic.
That's right. So you had river traffic and railroad traffic once they created that.
That's right. So they had
cool.
two different ways to get things in and out, and railroad drove our economy for a while, and then it started to wane into the 20th century, and you had a lot of industries that pumped out a lot of pollution. And I'm old enough to remember when Chattanooga was just dirty and nasty and polluted and smelled bad. At night especially. Growing up, I remember that.
Wow, yeah.
And it's certainly changed today.
Yes, it has. It has certainly changed. I was thinking about some other neighborhoods that are a little further out. Can you tell us a little bit more about Hixson and how that came about? Because that's really developed into a very large residential area.
Well, Hixson is a family name, and I forgot the gentleman's name, but he was actually the postmaster, and the post office was often located along the railroad track.
Okay.
And so that was located in this, I'm trying to even think how to describe it, but there is the railway travels over Hamel.
Yeah.
Sometimes they park the train there, much to people's dismay.
Yeah.
But if you go north, then Hixson Pike goes over the railroad.
Correct, yes.
Well, if you look down to the left, the Hixson Depot was there. And there's right now, I think it's Old Hixson Pike that travels through there, and you can cut up there and go to the light. Well, There's nothing there but a signaling box now, but there used to be a little mini depot looking thing, mainly for mail packages. We didn't have Amazon, so you would order something from the Sears catalog. It would come a few weeks later, and it would come through the train.
Yeah.
So he was the postmaster. There was a lot of land up there. And one thing I've learned is if you were around a certain time period and you had any importance or, owned a lot of land, things got named after you.
Yeah.
So Hixson,
interesting. Yeah.
It grew up around the depot, which at the time was known as the Cincinnati Southern Railway. Then they actually, for a while, called it North Chickamauga.
That's what they called that area?
That area was called North Chickamauga. And they were like, that's too confusing. Right. So
nobody can pronounce it anyway, right? If they're from out of town.
That's right. And this is interesting, too. The railroad misspelled Hixson. They spelled it Hixon.
Okay.
Well, once the railroad names something, you can't tell them they're wrong.
It's stuck. Yeah.
So the old pictures of that post office, so to speak, or that stop is Hixson. All the train schedules mention Hixson. And to this day, I looked up something, I was doing some research. Current day Norfolk Southern refers to it as Hixson.
Hixon.
That's right. So that's the spelling according to the railroad.
How about that even today?
Just for the railroad people. It really became named Hixson about 1892, that area. So that's kind of how it got its start.
I don't know if you have much data on this going further out, but I'm thinking about Ooltewah and Harrison and really that whole area between Highway 58 and I-75, just any of that area on the kind of the northeast side of Chattanooga. That has grown to be such a populated area. I know it was all farms. It was even farms when I was in high school. So
yeah, it's been farms more recently, and I don't know when it was named Ooltewah, but it also sat along a railway.
That's right. That's right.
Railway.
There's a railway that runs right through there.
In that area, the original James County seat was there, which preceded Hamilton County. So it goes way back. That area was actually the first county seat was there. Until Dallas across the river stole it.
Okay.
Which is also gone. But there was an Ooltewah station. The post office of Ooltewah operated from about 1837 to 1843, a short time. Then it became Julian Gap. And then, James County and that area moved across the river to Dallas. Mm-hmm. There was also Harrison, which used to be a community it's
underwater now.
It's underwater, and it's out there from Lorette. I call it Lorette Marina. Mm-hmm. What is it called now? Island Cove?
Yeah, they call it Island Cove now.
Hey, mold.
Well, and I know that Harrison Bay State Park also kind of looks over what would have been Harrison, or what was Harrison, up until whenever, was it 1940?
1940 is when they closed the gates of the dam.
1940.
And so they had already moved all that, and parts of Soddy, of course. And I just did a page about poor Soddy, and it really, and they were just so abused up there.
I think I saw a photo you had of the
before
road.
And after.
Yeah, before and after of the highway, right?
That's
or
right.
road that was in the Soddy area, I guess.
Right. It was the main, if you're familiar with the Soddy area, there's a fishing pier that juts out. You'll see it from Highway 27, or as old-timers call it, Corridor J. Mm-hmm. But if you look off to the side, you can see this long fishing pier-like thing. That used to be Highway 27. That was a piece of it that's left, and they put a dock on the end of it. But so the picture that I posted recently was actually donated by Steve Smith up at the Soddy Museum. We have a great museum up there, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was donated by, and I scan negatives and things for folks like that. And I'm like, Steve, this is kind of interesting. Where was this? He said, oh my gosh, that was Highway 27. But the sad story with Soddy is that they had gone through all this when roads were first being redesigned for cars and not just horse and buggy. It was the Good Roads movement and the Dixie Highway and all that came along. And Soddy and Daisy, which were two separate communities, they were told, okay, we're going to reroute this road. Well, Soddy's portion of it got rerouted away from what was their downtown, which didn't sit too well, right? So Judge Cummings, that's the person I couldn't think of earlier, Judge Cummings was the main judge over all these decisions, and they weren't too happy with him. There were all these accusations flying. But anyway, they moved the road to what is now a fishing pier. And they're like, oh, my gosh. And you can see in that picture, you can see a little old car and a gas pumps and stuff. And they were just recovering from that move. Then TVA says, oh, by the way, we're about to flood it.
We're going to flood the whole thing and make it Chickamauga Lake.
Yeah, that's right. And so they're like, what? We just moved. So again, now it loops down there near the ball fields. But what most people don't know, and I didn't know until I started down that rabbit trail, is that they had to move the road twice. They're still some people are still bitter about that.
Yeah, I bet they are. That's true. Well, when TVA built Chickamauga Dam and then opened it, or in the case, as you mentioned, they closed the dam. They closed off the water.
The spillways, yeah.
The spillways in 1940, which was not that long ago when we really think about it. There were over 900 families that were displaced that the TVA had to purchase their land. And I'm sure they did it through, I know they did it through eminent domain.
They did.
So whether you wanted your land bought or not, it was getting bought. And you had to move. And so there were over 900. That's a lot of people. And their farms, their homes.
I'm surprised that's not more. I mean, I don't know. It was all over the place.
It must have been that they were, it must have been so far out in the country. Is the only thing I can think.
Well, one of the other things on that page with Soddy is you can click on another link and it takes you to an overlay of the TVA maps, land maps that I pieced together so that it was contiguous, and you can actually overlay it and see what's there now and who owned it back before it was flooded.
Oh, interesting.
You see a lot of old names like Clift and other areas that have roads named after, Lovelady Lewis. All these old roads were people's names in that time.
How about that?
But the thing about the dam is it was built in 3 years, 11 months, 29 days, 28 days actually.
Just under 4 years.
Just under 4 years.
Yeah.
They built that, closed the gates ahead of schedule.
That's amazing.
Meanwhile, not to rub it in, but kind of to rub it in, the lock replacement project, and I have a counter on the website. It's been in progress for 21 years.
How about that?
Not continuously,
yeah.
But it started and stopped and started and stopped. But I'm very impressed the generations that preceded us and the moxie or whatever you want to call it, the people that built that dam. And you look at earlier construction pictures, which this is on my website too, you'll say, wow, that looks familiar. Those same cofferdams that they created to hold the lake back while they built stuff, same technology they used then.
Interesting. So the same stuff that they did.
They didn't have the tall cranes, but they had the cofferdams. They did a lot of the things. And if you could build the dam without the road above it, we didn't have a road over the dam until 1954, by the way. This thing called World War II got in the way. They weren't really approving other projects,
Yeah, so we had the dam, but there was no bridge.
There's no bridge. Yeah. That would be very frustrating,
Yeah.
And one of the people who did a lot of work on getting that was Judge Thrasher. That's why it's named after him.
The Thrasher Bridge.
Thrasher Bridge. So
how about that Highway 153 going across the dam.
My parents remember because they would have been, 14 years old or so before there was a bridge across the dam.
Yeah, right.
And I do remember when it was just 2 lanes.
Oh, sure.
And you were just hoping the people on the other lane weren't texting. No, they weren't texting back then. No. But thank goodness,
Yeah. We've seen some bridges change over the years here. We definitely have.
Have you ever been on a ferry in this area? Ridden a ferry?
I have not. I have never ferried across the Tennessee River.
Well, back before that, what they call it, the Highway 60 bridge was built up. There's a Highway 30 bridge and Highway 60 north.
In the North Hamilton County?
Yeah, Dayton area, between Cleveland and Dayton. I remember my father took myself and my sister and others to ride the ferry over just for old time's sake. I don't think I'd ever been on it before, but I got a picture of it. It doesn't look like something I would trust.
Yeah.
Nowadays, I would be like, I'm going to put my car on this raft.
Yeah.
But they would come across, put, put the little ramps down, you drive on. They could fit maybe 4 or 5 cars max. These were big 70s cars.
Right.
And they put to the other side. But I would welcome a ferry today because I live in Hixson, Middle Valley area that's close to Soddy, and we hate having to drive all the way down. Like, if you're going to go visit somebody in Collegedale or Cleveland,
Yeah.
you could be there in 5 minutes if we just had a bridge there.
Yeah.
But I would
or
pay
a ferry.
I would pay for a ferry. I don't know if we'll ever get
Maybe
to that
there's a
point.
business idea, Sam.
You'd have to get through TVA, and that's probably why we don't have a ferry.
That's probably so. That's true. Well, is there anything else that we've missed or anything you'd like to cover?
Well, there's so much, and I do encourage people to go to the website and I still find people that haven't been to it, and then they'll message me and say, "Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I didn't know this exists."
Yeah.
I looked up and it was an hour later, because there were so many photos. I try to make as much available as possible, and books that are not in, they're not clearly public domain, but I don't think anybody's going to come after me.
Yeah.
So I have that on there. One thing I will mention, if you have an interest in Cameron Hill, there is a whole page devoted to that. John Wilson at the Chattanooga has written he wrote 12 articles on his website, Chattanoogan, about Cameron Hill that associated with some photos that were found and donated for scanning. That's the other thing I do, is I do digital donations, as I call them. If you have old photos, but you don't know if you want to let go of them yet,
Yeah.
I will scan them if you're willing to share them, and I'll give them right back to you. That's how we have so many great photos.
That's how you acquire
So many good views.
Yeah.
Because people want to share them, but they're not ready to get rid of them yet.
Sure.
So that's a huge problem. If you donate them to a museum, if we had a museum, we don't have a museum, they are going to go into the back room somewhere, like the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they're pushing the little
Yes.
cart.
They're going to go get filed away.
They're going to get filed away. So do keep that in mind. I have a contact page on the website. But real quickly, Cameron Hill had beautiful homes on it for a brief period of time. It was, people still talk about what a tragedy it was torn down. Maybe. But the problem with Cameron Hill is there was a lot of shoddy construction on the sides of it. You had these grandiose houses at the top. You've got houses on the side that were, we think shoddy construction is only done today. No, it's always been around. You got builders that do better jobs than others, and some of them are about turning things pretty quick. Well, these were drafty wooden structures with no running water and electricity when they built them.
Okay.
Then they became rental space, and you had landlords that didn't improve things, and it was slums. So you had these lofty houses at the top, you had slums at the bottom, and then we needed to put a freeway through.
Yeah.
And there was federal money available to move the undesirables out of areas, and that happened in many cities. Call it what you want, but it did occur here. And they lopped off the top of that hill, including everything that was on it. And then you remember the Cameron Hill apartments that were up there for several years.
Sure.
A lot of people have fond memories of those. And then that went away, and now we have Blue Cross.
That's right.
So that was the very quick history of Cameron Hill, and it was taken down 1960-61.
Is when the highway was put through?
Right. It was locked off, and the highway was put through. And then, by the way, hundreds of photos that popped up, which I feature on the website, were digitally donated by someone whose father in his late 20s was hired by the city of Chattanooga as a property assessor.
Ah.
And so he's fresh out of college, and he's going around taking these black and white Polaroids, which had a surprising resolution, but he was taking assessment photos.
Yeah.
All over.
So he had photographs of
270 something photos.
Yeah.
And luckily, his son held on to it.
Now we all get to
get to enjoy it. So,
How about that?
That's what I'm all about, is just making sure as much as possible can be shared. And I'll keep doing it until I can't.
Yeah, well, Sam, I appreciate it, and I know we as a community and as a city appreciate what you've done. I mean, what you continue to do. It's really a treasure. It's a city treasure, and
Thank you.
I think about other cities that don't have a Sam Hall doing their webpage like this, and they don't have this.
Yeah, well, there's different versions of it everywhere, but I'm proud of what I've done, and I really appreciate everybody that's worked with me to get content. So I'm always looking for new content.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and thank you for being on the show today to talk about some neighborhoods and some history of Chattanooga.
Thank you.
So Sam's website, again, is ChattanoogaHistory.com. How can someone get in touch with you, Sam, I guess through ChattanoogaHistory.com?
Yeah, the easiest thing is just hit the website and right at the top of every page, there is an About button, and from that you can do a contact form.
Okay.
So that you don't even have to know my email address because it'll get to me.
Well, and I'm Blake Watson, agent with Epic Realty. If you want to reach me, you can do that by my mobile phone. It's 423-315-1815. Or my brokerage office phone is 888-893-3537. You can find me on Facebook and LinkedIn as Blake Watson and on Instagram as Rock and Roll Blake. My website is athomechattanooga.com. And if this podcast has been helpful to you, well, please share this podcast with a friend and follow this podcast so you won't miss any episodes. And until next time, I wish you all the best in your real estate journey.